What if you realize that the food you eat could be harming you? This alarming question is at the heart of James Colquhoun's groundbreaking documentary, Food Matters, which challenges long held beliefs about health, diet, and the big food industry. James's journey as a filmmaker began with a personal mission to heal his father, and it evolved into a broader quest to expose the profound impacts of nutrition on our health and consciousness. His work with films like Food Matters, Hungry for Change, and Transcendence not only changed lives, but sparked a global conversation about the true nature of healing and wellness. In this episode, James shares how he went from being a filmmaker to becoming the CEO of Gaia, the media company based in Boulder, Colorado. And his story reinforces how personal challenges can lead to significant insights and life-changing ventures. He discusses the power of media in shifting perceptions and improving lives, and how his current role continues his mission to elevate human consciousness through spiritual and health education. James has a wealth of experience both as an entrepreneur and as an operator in one of the most dynamic industries out there. So whether you're an entrepreneur, someone who is really interested in health, or want to improve the planet, this episode is packed with lessons on growth, resilience, and the power of conscious media. I hope you enjoy this conversation with James Colquhoun. Hey, James Colquhoun, thanks so much for joining us on the Conscious Entrepreneur podcast.
Hi, Alex. Great to be here.
So you've got a really interesting story. It really made a mark around nutrition, health, energy, and bringing these stories to the world to the point where you are now the CEO of Gaia. So like really in the spiritual media business, we'll put it that way. What was it that got you started along this path? How did you realize that your calling, your work involved education around spirituality, energy, and life improvement for people?
I think maybe like many entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, it started with something personal, and some of the greatest companies and the best ideas are built by people sort of scratching their own itch per se. And one of the things that was happening in my life prior to becoming an entrepreneur and going on this journey of conscious media and spiritual media, as you say, was that my father was unwell. He had entrusted his health to the high priests of modern medicine. And this increasingly resulted in him being put on more and more medications, and his health declined. And there was this crisis in the family. And parallel to that journey, I had taken more and more of an interest in personal development and human behavior and why people do what they do. Why do I do what I do? Beliefs, values, all these sort of subconscious drivers of our everyday existence. And part of that journey was looking at why do we eat what we eat, and what is the chemical industry all about, and the big food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. And you start to peel back the layers of this sort of consensus reality that we all play a part in. And you see inconsistencies, and you see areas where corporations and powerful groups of people have sort of manipulated those a little bit for gain, not always in the interest of the individual. And I started to see this from my father, his doctor saying, oh, it doesn't really matter what you eat. Your diet's great. You just have this problem. Take these medications. And to me, I was starting to think, wait, this is not a truth.
It's amazing that in the 21st century, we are still hearing that, isn't it?
It is. And I think it's slightly less common, but not really. And that to me was shocking. And I think studying nutrition and these personal development sort of practices, I was like, wow, how can he not understand this side of the message? So I started to try to teach him, and he was like, James, you're not a medical doctor. And he was correct. So I'm like, okay, I don't have a leg to stand on here. How am I going to get this message to him? And the idea that came to me was like, why don't we interview a lot of these experts? I mean, this is a simple idea now, but in 2006 and 7, it was sort of groundbreaking, before podcasts were really a big thing. Why don't we interview a lot of these experts, essentially prepare what would be like a DVD series for transformation on health, and then give it to my father, and hopefully he'd believe these people because they're medical doctors, researchers, naturopaths, etc. So we started that process. took him the footage. My partner and I, we started this sort of venture and this project. Took him the footage. He essentially became a believer overnight, which was a little disheartening to me personally. But my ego took a small hit.
He won't listen to you, but he'll listen to all the experts that you put on film.
Then after he transitioned off 6 medications practically overnight. Within 3 months was back to normal after 6 years. Bedridden and in a really tough sort of state. And this really inspired us to go, why don't we take this to more people? And it was already part of the idea, but then it was like, let's make a documentary. And then it became, well, let's make this like a proper movie. And then it launched in 2008. And shortly thereafter, it just went into 13 languages and was one of the first films that Netflix picked up around this topic.
I remember watching it and just really being drawn into the story. And I mean, I'm a big believer in all this stuff around health and nutrition, but this was one of the first ones. Like, this is one of the first ones that basically called out the old beliefs that we all had about food and the food system and the food pyramid and what was good for us and not good for us, and just painted a very clear picture about the tremendous diversity of incentives and interests that were driving our behavior there. And so it was really like a wake-up call for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, it was. And I feel like it was just a really interesting timing. Like, I think if 2007, one of the comments that my partner Laurentine, she had from her sister was, good luck with that goji berry film. And and I think it was just speaking to the time. Like, this was not a common thing. People didn't know about organics as much, or biodynamic, or fermented foods, or superfoods, or plant-based diets, or detoxification, or raw foods, or juicing, or cleansing. And you fast forward from 2008 to, say, 2016, 18, 20, when Whole Foods sold to Amazon, this sort of era, then you could get 6 different types of nut milk in the Midwest. And that was unheard of, right, in 2008. And so I feel like a huge wave of consciousness around eating clean, looking after your body, this sort of wellness revolution, as this Paul Zane-Filzer guy spoke to, I feel like that was a huge trend, and we just happened to be at the very beginning of it, because we listened to an issue that was pertinent in our personal lives, which became a macro issue that people sort of connected with.
That's such a great place to start. And then from there, you really took the stance of saying, well, how do we turn this into something for maximum impact? And you created education programs, you created certification programs around this. It eventually turned into its own media company. Walk us through going from, hey, I'm trying to convince my dad, to this is becoming a documentary, to this is now something that Netflix has picked up, to this is now, a business with multiple revenue streams and a lot of things going on.
I think it came from an idea. I remember there was one quote from, and it was someone I followed early on, and I still think his work is very valuable for a lot of reasons, but it was Tony Robbins, and he spoke about this idea of like, if you want to be successful long-term, you need to add more value to people's lives than anybody else is doing. And I thought about this, and I thought, well, I've added a lot of value to my father's life. How could we add more value to other people's lives that are suffering, that are going through just the challenges of, incarnating as a human? We go through so many challenges, death, grief, chronic illness, midlife crisis. I mean, this is just like, if you escape without any of that, you likely died when you were young, and that's not a very great story. So it's this is the sort of tragedy of the human experience, which Buddhism sums up perfectly. Life is suffering, and I always hated that, because I believe that life is not suffering. But the older you get, you're like, okay, it sort of is. And if you start businesses, you realize that life really is suffering, because business is just how calm can you be during chaotic times. And I feel that. With regards to this next step, it was like, well, how do we add more value to people's lives? And it was like, well, let's create more films, let's create training programs, let's look at distribution. There was a lot of films in the niche that were not achieving good distribution, and DVDs were still a thing. Can you imagine back then? So we became a DVD distributor. Then, then we started to look at, well, a lot of my friends were like, well, how come your two films, we did another one called Hungry for Change, how come they were both on Netflix? They were at, at checkouts at Whole Foods all across the country for like 3 months at a time. How come you got that? How can I get it? And they were bringing me their films. And I'm like, well, let me try. I'll ring some distributors. And they're like, well, we can't take all of them. And Netflix take 1 in 10. And, and so then I was living in Southern California at the time for a little bit. I bought a new TV and a new Mac computer. And 2 things happened at once on that same day. One is that the Mac computer had no DVD drive. 2 was that the TV I bought had a big red Netflix button on it. And obviously I knew that this trend was happening. I mean, I'm selling into these distributors, but it felt like a watershed moment where it was like, this is the moment that DVD dies and we enter a new era. And so essentially I just called up my team in Australia and said, guys, we're starting a streaming TV channel. It's going to be a Netflix for health and wellness. Let's go. And like with, I think every entrepreneur needs to have a very, very, very high level sense of naivete, and that it's so much easier to not know what challenges you're going to come up against, because if you knew, you probably wouldn't start. And I feel like this was a perfect example. I'm like, great, we're going to start a TV channel. Well, we need to figure out licensing.
Sounds easy to say. We're going to start a TV channel. Yeah,
that was the fun part. I mean, and then essentially we did start one, and it did start to achieve a lot of traction. And we started to grow that out. And by the time, we were, I think 3 years in, we're at like 1,600 titles, over 900 hours of content, and we were releasing titles on the weekly basis, and producing a lot, signing a lot. And we did another project called Transcendence, which was a 5-part series with the likes of like Novak Djokovic and Wim Hof and Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton. And just that was the next evolution of the story, and kept trying to add more value. That was really the main focus.
And across the different lines of business, which wound up being more significant than you thought or less significant than you thought?
I think that, some of the transactional courses were probably a little less significant. I know there were some players in the space that were a little more focused on that as a business model. I think, my father was an accountant and company auditor, and I think part of my genetic makeup was that I was attracted to high margin businesses where you've got a lot of space for G&A, and if you're making like a 90% plus gross margin or a cash contribution margin, and then you're making an 85% plus gross margin, then there's plenty of space for you
to do stuff,
but also to innovate and to make mistakes, and to go, that didn't work out, let's try something else. Whereas if you're on like a 50% margin, or, you just it's thinner, it's more difficult. And so I guess I found myself attracted to the sort of digital era of business. And then in particular, subscription was, such a hot focus in, the 2000 and, 15, 16, 18, 20, it was like really a thing where, Spotify was launching, and so everyone was thinking, well, what can I do that's subscription? But then comes the challenge of like, well, you need content on a frequent basis. And is it an expert-based business like Tony Robbins, or is it a faceless brand like IBM? Or is it somewhere in the middle like Richard Branson? And you go on a Virgin flight, and you almost expect him to open the cockpit and say hello. So I feel like we were trying to dance between all those, and but subscription digital really just floated to the top, and kept our focus there. Yeah.
Great. And then what was the process like to get acquired by Gaia? I know that's how you joined the company. They bought yours, and then you've since been promoted to CEO. But walk us through what that was all about.
So I think about 3.5 years in, I came to this point where And I'd self-funded all my business up until then, save for the first film, of which we borrowed non-dilutive debt of $50,000 from the Bank of Roy, and that was my father's name. So after we helped him heal, he helped us finish the film, uh, of which we paid him back, and he didn't get equity. He's a little bit cheesed at that. But we, self-funded, and it got to a point where it was starting to get to some critical mass, and we had 30-odd team at a headquarters in Australia. We were selling primarily to the US and Canada, but we had members all around the world. We had a team of about 12 to 15 in the Philippines, and it was just starting to get bigger, and we were getting great growth, as you do at early stages of a company. And I wanted to keep that growth going because I could see the potential of the category in the space. And so essentially I was thinking, well, there's only three things that happen in a company. One, it dies, which you never plan for. And if you're generating cash, well, then you can solve that. Two, it grows and you keep it. Or three, you sell it, right? And so I think if I had to think about these two, it grows and keep it. Well, that was happening. So three, you sell it, and or merge or bring on investors and dilute, right? And scale growth faster. And I wanted to get to a larger market because I believed in the potential of the category. And that there was a significant gap in the education. There's an education gap between what, if people had access to this knowledge, they'd be healthier, happier, more abundant, and living a better quality life. And I felt that that was something that people should have access to. And the internet sort of promised that with the democratization of information, but quickly it became censored, controlled, and not that. So I was friends with multiple people in the space, from Vishen Lakhiani with Mind Valley to Reed Tracy at Hay House to Yurka Rasavi at Gaia. I was speaking with them as friends and thinking, well, I'm open to doing something. And it was Gaia that was the most strategic fit. They were, in essence, a pure play streamer, but they were focused more on, let's say, consciousness as opposed to just health. But they didn't have a very robust library in that space. So it felt like a really beautiful strategic idea. And, after some discussions, it was like, let's do a deal. We made it happen. And that was 2019. And at that point, took a seat on the board and went from there.
And so you get acquired, and so you're thinking, super, now we can slot into a bigger distribution system. It's going to get us more people. It's going to get us into places that we haven't been before. We're now going to have resources to do even more projects in the area that we're excited about. What wound up happening? The reason I'm asking is a lot of entrepreneurs, we don't know what happens once you get acquired. Do you get to actually fulfill your vision? Does it get stifled? There's so many stories about companies acquiring startups or other companies, and then nothing happens or it bombs or what have you. What was it like in your case?
Look, I think any merger or acquisition, there's a merging of visions, there's a merging of beliefs, there's a merging of technology, there's a merging of culture, there's a merging of all these things. Gaia was aligned in that their mission, our mission, is to elevate human consciousness. Now, consciousness is many things, but it's ultimately, the easiest way to explain it is like energy, frequency, and vibration. Low energy, low frequency vibration is, fear, pain, frustration, lack, etc. High frequency, high vibration is love, compassion, empathy, oneness, unity. And so to me, there was a strong alignment there on the values front. So I figure any integration can be solved in terms of like complexity, as long as that North Star is true. And then meeting with the board, seeing their collective understanding of that in their unique filter was great. And it was a success, the merger, and we brought our subscribers over to the Gaia platform. And Gaia is listed, so their model and their go to market was very different than ours. Ours was self funded and scrappy, and we have to grow and figure it out. Gaia's, many people might know the previous incarnation of the brand, which was Gaia, which was like a yoga products company, and they had a store within every Costco and Whole Foods in the US. They sold off that business in 2016 to buy back stock, rebrand as Gaia, and focus purely on a subscription video sort of go to market and scaling that out as quickly as possible to sort of capture, or I would say more appropriately, to solidify the Gaia brand as the key player in the consciousness, health, transformation, spiritual growth space. And so they grew quite fast to 500,000. And, we've just recently closed the end of last year over 800,000 subscribers. And so we're a fraction of that on our Food Matters, streaming business, the FMTV business. And so to start to speak about those sort of levels of numbers was what I had envisaged. So,
Mm-hmm.
you start something, it's like, yeah, I want to get there. Well, how do I get there? Well, I either raise capital, burn cash to grow, or someone's already done it. Let's roll in with them and take a smaller part of a bigger company and facilitate that process. So I feel like it just was an evolution of what I was already thinking. And so it felt natural. And having a board seat helped me to retain some level of voice in the in the merger and in the go forward, and that was great. And the Borders was an exceptional group of people. I mean, I felt like an outsider, but humbled and honored to be a part of that story as well.
That's awesome. That's so cool to hear, especially when there's success for all parties involved in an M&A, and so that's really such a great outcome all around. Now you've got a new project coming out. We talked about Food Matters, which came out in 2008 or so. We talked about Hungry for Change that followed that. Then you did Transcendence, which interviewed, as you mentioned, all these super cool people, amazing folks: Joe Dispenza, Wim Hof, Rich Roll, Jim Quick. Vishen Lakhiani, Brendan Bouchard, just like tons and tons of interesting people. And then you are in the process of launching, I think the timing that I have here is right. You're in the process of launching a brand new film called Love Over Money, which is the story of John Robbins, the heir to Baskin Robbins, and his process of separating, finding his own true voice, finding his own values, living his own way, all the drama that happened with his father in particular and his family. Tell us what that story was about, and in particular, what captivated you around this story.
So through his son, I'd known John and John's story for a number of years. But when my father was going through his transformation, we were sending books to him. And one of the books we sent to him was a book called Diet for a New America, which was written in the late 80s, and this book, it was written in the 80s. Yeah, this book, my father didn't read because he's like, look, whatever, I'm not going to let my son, he's on his own thing. But Mum started reading it, and Mum was reading this to him, and there's just beautiful stories in there. And then it starts to talk about factory farming, and it's like just what a miracle it was for modern agriculture, but what a nightmare it was for just ecological damage, the animals, and anyone can understand that, right? I mean, whether you consume animal products or not is not the conversation. It's just like, have a look at the situation. That's it, And so it was a really landmark book, and his story was powerful. And in Transcendence, actually, I interviewed him, and he became the story in episode 5. And it was more about purpose and like how to align with purpose and how important that was in life, as an entrepreneur, or just in, I like to categorize life in three ways. You sleep, and let's all hope you do that well. You have waking hours with yourself, family, loved ones, friends, play, outdoor, whatever. And then you have mission. I don't really call it work. I only call it mission. And with those 3 categories, you want to ideally, well, the sleep is different, but with the waking time and the mission time, you want to align that as much to your core purpose. But if people don't know what that is, well, close your eyes and meditate. Or what do you dream about if you had nothing to dream about? Or if money was no object, what would you do when you wake up in the morning? And you'd say nothing, but then that lasts for like 30 days. And any entrepreneurs here that have sold a company that lasts for like maybe 2 months,
Right.
I'd love to do nothing. Okay, let's see how that goes. 3 months later, you're starting 2 companies and a nonprofit. Anyway, so what is it that you'd spend your time doing if you had all the resources in the world? And I think that the more you can align to that, the more magic happens. So this was the part of his story in Transcendence, but the full story was never told. I approached him and I had a friend of mine that was in Hollywood that had made like The Reverend and The Women and the Jobs movie, and he cast Ashton Kutcher for that. And he was quite a prominent producer. I said, "Hey, I've got this guy in this story. It's wild, you know." And I told him the story. He's like, "This is amazing. I'd love to make it. We should do it." I'm like, "Great." So I told John, and he was excited. Then after a little while, he's like, "I don't know about Hollywood," and I'm like, "Yeah, I get it." I said, "I'd be retaining like a producer role, so you can be assured that I'll make sure that it's the right story." And he's like, "I don't know." And then he got cold feet. And I was driving to the airport one day, and I thought, I can't let this go. So I called him and I said, "John, we should do something. You know, I can't in good conscience, like just let this story not really be told in a meaningful way." I said, "Why don't we just start with a documentary?" He's like, "Great." So I flew out there with some crew. We filmed it. We went into post-production, shot all the narrative sequences, did it. And, you know, I'm really proud with how it's come out. Obviously, being a fifth project, it's an evolution for me. It's unusual that it's a single person story. Typically, I have multiple people speaking. And, you know, I think the formats are also evolving in digital too. Like, I originally had it as a 3-part miniseries, but then it ultimately worked better as a feature. And then there's like an opening sort of tease, and then it goes into the feature because the start of the story is slow. So you can't start a slow story at digital because people will just drop. So it's like, boom, story, and then the end is a really big unknown. And you know, seeing people at the there was a film festival in Santa Barbara the other week called Illuminate, and it was the opening night film, and Deepak Chopra did a sort of 20-minute talk to open it. We have Joaquin Phoenix, who signed on as executive producer, and to see people at the end just reacting to the story, it was just like, oh, so touching. It was really, I just feel very like humbled and honored to be able to tell that story. And I also love making films. You know, I'm obviously I'm I'm running a public company now, which doesn't offer me much time to do these creative pursuits. But I think it's important sometimes for me to have two different sides. You know, there's a creative side, and then there's a business side, and I think that serves me, and I love doing it.
And so the film, so Love Over Money, has been in sort of the film festivals, like you were saying, and it's launching on Gaia soon, right? When's that happening?
So it's launching on Gaia June 6th. I'm not sure when this podcast comes out, but June 6th this year, 2024. And yeah, we're going to actually do a free worldwide online premiere, and then it will live on Gaia exclusively thereafter. And I love doing a free premiere to start with. I don't know, it's just the model of building reciprocity. You know, I think, you know, there's a lot of talk in AI at the moment around like how to become the dominant player. And like, so OpenAI is like, you have to pay for the model, all this sort of stuff, you know, free. And then Facebook goes, okay, well, anyone can use Llama 3, you know, and it's this sort of scorched earth model, and open it all up. And if you're looking to get, I don't know, I just like the idea that if you're more open and you build reciprocity, then you create a better energy. And to speak to this idea, you said, well, the merger and acquisition was good for everybody. I think in business, I have this philosophy that if you can create what I call like a win-a-thon, where everyone wins, then ultimately it's good for business. So if I think about the consumer, if I think about the filmmaker, if I think about the shareholders, if you can create a win of the environment, if you can create a win at every level, they're the unique sort of areas of focus that I love to sort of invest more in or focus more of my time on, because it's not just like, well, I win and this person doesn't, or you know, so I feel like having a free premiere sort of speaks to that ethos.
That's such a great contribution, and you know, it kind of speaks to the fact that, you know, really this is a gift, right? What you're doing, you're creating through film, you're giving the world a gift. Now, of course, you're gonna make sure that you get compensated for that, but part of the gift is, you know, free premiere, everybody watch it and get it out there into the consciousness.
Yeah, share it. And if you love this message, if you want to support it, and if you want to watch more films like this, sure, sign up.
Of course,
We'd love
yeah.
to have you as a member. It'd be great. And if not, thank you. I love you. Have a great day.
Now, creating a win at all levels is such a great philosophy and approach. And I'd like to understand, what are the other things that you bring to creating your company culture, your team culture, or your personal philosophies yourself about about leadership. So that's one of them, of course. And you spend a lot of time thinking about energy and holistic self-management and personal growth. But what do you think about when it comes to leading an organization, making sure all this stuff is part of the culture?
I think, in starting companies myself, I just sort of learned that, I guess by accident or reading great books. And I guess probably first of all, I had good enough mentors to teach me that no entrepreneur is an island, and I think that was such an important lesson early on, because I feel in my youthful exuberance, it can seem like you know everything. And the older you get, the less you realize that you know. And I think it's that humility that starts to breed, good entrepreneurs. And so the quicker I realized that, the more guidance I had. And as I did more of that, I started to realize through these great teachers and guides and consultants and experts that really the best teams win, and obviously the best ideas win, the best categories win. There's all of these things you need to get right, but the best teams win. And recently I sort of read something about, they did a reverse analysis on the most winning NBA teams of all time. And the only correlating factor that they found amongst the most winning teams of all time was that they gave the most amount of high fives and hugs of any other team. And I thought, that's because the best teams win and the best teams love each other. You know what I mean? There's like this sense of like, I love to do this. I love my team. I love this. So I've always loved the idea of team building and aligning everybody behind a vision and a mission that's sort of common and big. It's something that's like big. And coming to Gaia, it was the biggest team I've run, and it's a public company, so it was a big step up for me. And I really wanted to sort of solidify what would my approach to culture be here. And I have a 5-step plan that I came up with, which is love, compassion, empathy, high functioning, and high performance. And so love, compassion, and empathy are slightly different things, but they're similar. Love is the frequency, right? And it's a vibration. If you're vibrating with love, not like in love to another person, but just in love in general, in love with life, being grateful for the human existence. I think this is the first thing I look for when I'm interviewing people. Like, if you made it to my desk, you already can do the job. I'm like, how much do you love being alive, and how much do you love giving yourself to the world? This is like number one. If you're aware, that's frequency, right? So that's love. Compassion is, do you open the door for somebody? Do you care about the homeless person on the side of the road? Do you speak to the janitor? These are classic values that are very much lost in more of the modern generation. I don't want to sort of generalize here, and it's becoming increasingly lost in these generations of entitlement. So it's like compassion is somebody that has humility, compassion, and that sort of speaks to empathy, which is like that you can feel into other people's pain. Because as a customer-led organization, if you can't feel other people, if you're immune to their feelings, how can you serve them, right? And so love, compassion, and empathy are the first three. And they're sort of like a cultural set point. Whenever I onboard people, I have this huge list of random questions I ask them, which have nothing to do with the role. And they're the most important questions I ask. And it's been the same questionnaire that I've had for like, I don't know, about 6 or 8 years, maybe longer.
Cool.
And that tells me about where they are on the love, compassion, and empathy scale.
Okay.
Then high functioning and high performance are two different things. High functioning is all to do with emotional intelligence. And this is, how capable are you to give and receive critical feedback? In particular, receive critical feedback. We've become so sensitive as a culture, in my opinion. I spent 5 years prior to moving here living in an indigenous culture in Vanuatu, which is a remote Pacific island. It's also a tax haven. We have nonprofits there, and this culture and this community are highly resilient. You'll drive your car and it'll be pouring rain on a Sunday afternoon, and there'll be a gentleman there just walking through the rain. It's just going down his face and body and everything, and he's got his best Sunday best on. And you stop and you're like, hey, would you like a lift, sir? And he's like, I'm okay, no problems, But in the West, we run from our car to the house so we don't get wet. So yeah, we've lost a lot of resilience, and our ancestors used to go to war, and I'm not saying that we want to do these things, but we shy away from hard things. And as we've done more of that, it's my contention that we've become less emotionally resilient and emotionally intelligent. And I think when you're working with teams, you want people to be emotionally intelligent, people that can handle feedback, that can have an ego hit, that can take something, and be like, okay, wash it off, next, let's go. And that can, because one of my teachers in yoga, he says that family is the deepest sadhana. Now, sadhana is a practice of spiritual growth, right? And if you're in an ashram with a guru, or you're with your family members, like the doubting uncle, the drunk auntie, and everything, they test you. You know what I mean? And you go through, it's a practice, right?
Sure.
I think business is a practice. And if you have low emotional intelligence, then you will struggle and you will create friction, and it will not be good for the organism and the organization. So high functioning, that's my fourth point. Generally, it's quite easy to identify people that are low functioning because the culture will tell you. They will self-select as like, this is something's not right here. Right? And it's not about being always loved by everybody. Let's not mistake it with that.
Yep.
Then the fifth is high performance. That's just clear, and I think it was one of the Google execs or something, or maybe NVIDIA was saying the other month that, like, look, companies are not families; they're like sports teams. And I actually think that's probably a better analogy, because to go back to what I just said, families are full of like the drunk uncle, the doubting sister, all of these different characters, and so there's not really always a cohesiveness. In fact, rarely ever. Whereas teams, you're about building cohesiveness, filling skills gaps. You support this person, you do this, and it's like work together with the same mission. And you can hardly get a family to move in the same direction. That's like pulling teeth.
Right.
So I would say, and that's high performance is the last. So those 5 culture points have been really important to me. And I think Jim Collins says it best. It's like with any org, you want the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. And if you center around some really beautiful culture points, I think it gives you a very clear way to determine, subjectively somewhat, how to self-select people into the org, and which people might not be serving the next step of the evolution of growth. And it's a difficult thing for owners, managers, founders to do, and I think it's something that you just have to develop a skill set for as you evolve. And I'm learning for sure.
That's super helpful. I love those 5 culture points. And when you were talking about family, it reminded me of that Ram Dass quote: "If you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family."
Yeah, right.
And so.
Yeah, Ram's actually a big teacher on our site. We acquired a large proportion of his library. We have a lot of his shorts, and he is just something else. I mean, he's like, the way that he disseminates spiritual knowledge is so practical, so powerful. And if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. It's so true. So
now,
true.
question for you. The mission of Gaia is to elevate the consciousness of the world and to really bring these messages out there. And at the same time, you're in the rough and tumble reality of being a public company, as you said. How do those two things live together? And essentially, my question is, I understand it probably works for you. How do you make it work for the rest of the world who may not be used to thinking and talking in the way that you do?
Yeah, it's a very interesting comment and question. And like, for me to be one week, at an investor conference in New York or meeting with investment bankers, and then the next week doing a meditation with a teacher before they go on stage just to speak about, consciousness, is it's very much like wearing 2 different hats. But I think entrepreneurs, especially founders, become more and more familiar with how to do that over time. I had this sort of theory, because I was trying to reconcile this as I was growing multiple companies, and it's this idea I've sort of generated around walking this fine line between philanthropy and commerce. And most businesses are of service in some fashion.
Sure.
And that's philanthropic in nature. You're serving, but philanthropy is really serving without wanting something in return, which you need to have an energy like that. I think if you have a needy energy in any relationship, people are turned off by it. A friend of mine gave a keynote here. We had a sold out event here in March at our headquarters in Colorado. We have like 150,000 square foot 13-acre campus, and we have an event center there where we sort of do live events and live stream it to the world.
Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. I was there in November 2019 for a weekend with Joe Dispenza. It was amazing.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember it from a conversation. And she was talking, and she was talking about how she lost her hearing, and this was a big spiritual journey for her. And she realized that as she lost her hearing, that energy speaks louder than words. And I think that as a company has an energy too. And if you have an energy of needing something from somebody, that will come across sort of quite clear. And the more you can have an energy of service, I am here to serve. How can I help you? Here's our vision. Here's our mission. Would love for you to come and play with us. If this could be of value to you, that creates an energy of, reciprocity. And that's that philanthropic side of a business, which I think every business needs. They need to think about, we're here to solve a big problem. We're here to serve your customer, whether it's corporate, B2B, customer, B2C, in what category and what niche, etc. Then on the flip side of that is that you got to generate cash and make money, right?
For sure.
And this is the nature of commerce, and the nature of shared risk, born out of Holland in the shipping and trading days, which we sort of migrated that idea, which became the stock market in New York, and now all companies are essentially shared risk ventures, save for sort of individually self-funded organizations and nonprofits. And so if you look at that idea, it's like, well, how can I be a slave to these two beautiful gods? One
Right.
is the customer, the end user, and the other one is the investor. And they're very different gods. The investor is like, you sit down at an investor conference, like, okay, here they come. Like, where's your ARPU? What's going on with this? What's your margin like this quarter? Where's your growth? And then you go speak to the customer and they're like, can you just help me? I can't sleep at night. So I feel like it is an interesting dichotomy to sort of balance those two. And I think it's mainly just about, I think this comes in a spiritual growth journey or in a conscious growth journey, of which I'm just beginning, and I feel like I've been beginning for a long time, and can imagine what enlightenment looks like. But it's it's some far off land that I might achieve some relative connection to in the future. Is that there is just two truths, at the same time, and it's being okay with that. It's like I have to review a 10Q and all the nuance of how we do something here, what's going on here, and what's in this, and then I have my weekly reports and all these things here. And then at the same time, I want to serve a customer and help elevate their soul and their journey through life and help make it more meaningful and more fulfillment and more happiness and more peace. And they couldn't be two further things, in terms of distance. And to just acknowledge those truths and be okay with both of them, I think, is probably the practice. And to learn to one of my business coaches, who I still work with to this day, my longest term business coach, and he's a board member of our Food Matters company still. He talks about this idea of a whoosh. And so you'll be in a meeting about this and that and this and the Q and this is how this needs to be said, and the technical accountant said this and the lawyer said this, and this is the new SEC compliance and ruling. And then I have to go speak on about content and consciousness and what are we going to do with this library. And I have to literally physically go whoosh and clear myself and then step into a new headspace. And constantly, as the complexity of my life has grown and my journey as an entrepreneur has grown, I'm having to do that more frequently and more often. And I feel grateful that I get to do all of it, to be honest, because I love it. But it can feel overwhelming, I think, to just hold all those different truths. And
Sure. Yeah,
it certainly has been for me at times. And I guess having a good self practice and having space.
I was just about to ask that. So, you're talking about holding these two ideas in your head at the same time. And you're talking about all the things that come along with running a company. You mentioned that you have a coach or maybe multiple coaches. What are the things that you lean on? What are the resources that you need at your disposal to be as high performing as you are?
Play, sleep, uh, meditation. I love like cold exposure and heat therapy.
Okay.
I would say just having a very good well, there's two things I would say. Having a very healthy relationship with self-love. And that feels like overly like self-righteous, or, it's been misconstrued in many ways. But I think just self-care, like going, I've had a big day. I just want to make a meal and relax. Or I feel like sleeping in. Or I feel like going for a walk in the sun. Or I feel like, really that whisper that you get, your body always whispers. You get that little tickle in the throat. You feel tired. It's like, I hear you. Let's go. And there's times to push. There's a philosophy I love, which is work hard, rest hard, play hard. Right. I
Yeah.
love that. But there's times when you just need to be like, oh, my body is whispering. Now it's talking to me, and soon it's going to yell. I need to be on top of
Mm.
this. So I think just developing that intuition as an entrepreneur, because sometimes there's no off switch. Typically, there's a type of personality which is attracted to entrepreneurship, and conscious business is a part of that. Then I would say there's like two elements. So one is having a strong relationship with self-love, and the other one is having like what one sort of coach trainer advised me, like a strong inner cheerleader. And I think that this is something that I've developed over the years just through practice, through mantra repetition, through reading like spiritual texts and being on my own spiritual journey, through learning some of the great lessons of the greatest spiritual teachers of time, like God resides within you as you, see love in everyone, everything is absolutely always unfolding perfectly. These types of mantras attune me to the fact of like, if the world is shiny and bright one day, yay. If the world is just horrible and dark one day, yay. So I think that's entrepreneur's journey, is that it's a tale of two cities, every single day sometimes, and in between meetings. So that strong inner cheerleader, I think, is really important, because very few on an entrepreneur's journey can be very lonely. And to be your own cheerleader, I think, is just an enormous, I found it an enormous benefit. I can't speak to other people. And when it's been tough, I'll be like, you're doing a great job. You got this. It's like, and just like being that self radiant sense of light, regardless of what's happening, I think is really important. And seeing life as a get to, not a have to. And I think also in the Vedic tradition, they talk about this idea of incarnation. So whether you believe in incarnation or not, is beside the point. But they say in the Vedic tradition, which is one of the oldest spiritual documented traditions that we have of this current version of humanity, they say that to have a birth, to receive a birth, is the same chance as a turtle coming up for a breath of fresh air in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and accidentally putting its head through a hole in a piece of driftwood. So when I frame my day like that, I can come into the biggest challenge, the biggest nightmare, or the biggest opportunity, or the biggest celebration with, wow, I get to do this. What an opportunity. What a moment to be alive. I can't believe it. And the more I've framed my life like that, the more my external reality has matched this. And I think that our reality, there's a lot of people that talk about this idea that we live in a simulation. And I would say, to some respects, there's a truth to that, because how you perceive your external reality is a matter of your inner state. One of my spiritual teachers says that your inner state is everything, and anything else is dust. Dust. All that matters is your state, and your state will ultimately create what you start to see in the outer world. And so I feel that the more I can focus on my self-love, developing a powerful state internally, and having this strong inner cheerleader, and not a critic that's always doubting and guessing, just being like, great job, or like, you stuffed up, that's okay, great job. It's like just being okay with all of it. I think being okay with everything, I think these are things that I've personally built up as like a not a war chest, let's say a treasure chest of tools to navigate the inevitable challenges of being in the world of business and trying to make a positive impact in the world and conscious business in that matter.
That's very inspiring. It's a great list of stuff to do. And, we need to pay attention to this, because if we're not constantly programming ourselves, if we're not constantly letting go of whatever's holding us back, if we're not active in that process, then we wind up getting in our own way. It really is. My inner state is all that is. Everything else is dust. Totally resonates.
Yeah. Everything is dust. And that's why, great spiritual teachers teach this idea of practice. Why do you practice? To get ready for the world, right? So it's like you do the exercise or the mantra or the meditation or the visualization or whatever your practice is to prepare yourself for the inevitability of suffering, right? And I always used to hate that Buddhism would say, oh, life's suffering. And I'm like, that's horrible. And then as you go along, like I said earlier, like, oh, yep, actually, it totally is at every turn.
Yes.
And so how can you suffer better? And I think about that a lot. I mean, how can you even, when suffering comes, go, oh, thank you. I am preeminently grateful for this suffering because I'm aware of how it's going to challenge my opportunity to grow and evolve and become a richer version of myself. And I think anyone that's listening to this that's been through a hard time, bankruptcy, financial issues, relationship issues, chronic health issues, death, grief, big life-changing moments. On the flip side, typically you'll be like, wow, if that didn't happen, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't have created this gold nugget that I now offer to the world. And so I think to lean in to this is a powerful, and that's the fourth culture point, high functioning. How much can you embrace, as Brendan Burchard speaks about this, embrace the suck, oh, it's really shitty. Fantastic. And like, oh, goody, and then this crazy thing's happening. Fantastic.
Well, as we both know, and anyone who's listening to this podcast also knows, the entrepreneur journey is full of ups and downs, and there's plenty of suck in there, and there's plenty to embrace. If you're willing to say thank you to the suffering, like you were suggesting there. Well, hey James, this is really a fantastic conversation, because we're taking practical examples from your life and these really practical stories, and then we're translating that into stuff that entrepreneurs can put into practice right now and right away. And we're doing it at a very high energy level, right? There's a lot of, there's just so much energy here. There's so much movement in the right direction around consciousness. So I just want to say, really appreciate you coming here to join us to talk about this stuff that not everybody has the opportunity to talk about. They're not always willing or open or just aware that they can do so. And it's so great to sort of blow the conversation open. Anything you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, just thank you for holding the space for these conversations. I think that conscious business will become a much bigger discussion point as we move into the future. And I believe more and more consumers and individuals will demand businesses that are doing good for the world, and that innovation will solve many of the great problems that we are challenged with today. And I'm very grateful to be a student. And please don't take anything that I've shared with you as gospel. These are just my lessons, and I will tell you that I am still integrating them. So there's work to do. So but thank you for offering me the opportunity to speak with you, Alex, and for your listeners listening in. So appreciate it.
Thanks. And as a reminder, Love Over Money comes out for free premiere on June 6th on Gaia. The great thing about that is the day after the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit. So that summit is on June 4th and 5th. We will launch this podcast ahead of the summit. We will include all the information that anyone needs to hopefully log on and make it to the free premiere. And if they don't make it to the free premiere, I hope they enjoy Gaia and subscribe and find a way to get involved with your content. So James Colquhoun, CEO of Gaia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.